Do you think it is really strange that society justifies violence toward children as parenting or discipline? Assault from women should never be met without equal force. I think some people are generally being willfully ignorant of my post. Of course, I am not talking about unprovoked attacks or domestic violence involving women. As many have pointed out, in situations where a woman initiates violence against a man, such as slapping, poking, punching, scratching, or worse, using a weapon to inflict harm, this is what I am referring to. Story 1. While women are typically physically weaker than their male counterparts on average, weaker does not necessarily mean less dangerous. Self-defense is a God-given right. Good luck telling a judge that, though. Story 2. The rule is to use as little force as possible while still defending yourself because the strength difference between men and women is significant. A woman attacking you unprovoked is a despicable person who should be punished and ostracized until she learns to improve, but that does not mean you have to risk causing serious harm with a fully powered punch when much smaller amounts of force can successfully protect yourself. If she has a weapon or is threatening a vulnerable person, that situation may require a different response, but overall, the rule is to use the smallest amount of force necessary to remove people from danger. Story 3. Same for all adults, not just women. I will never hit you first. But if you hit me without provocation, you can expect, at the very least, the same thing to happen to you. Story 4. I will hit a woman if I need to hit her to defend myself, as in objectively need. However, I have not needed to hit a man since I was about 15 to settle physical confrontations, so the odds of that actually happening are pretty slim. Story 5. Woman here. I personally think nobody should hit anybody. Unless on a very rare occasion there are exceptional cases where it may be necessary, such as if you are in imminent danger of death or life-changing injuries and hitting is the only option. But how often does that happen? If a woman hits a man first and he hits back, I would not feel sorry for her. There are a lot of men abused by women, physically or otherwise, and they are discouraged or afraid to speak up because they would be perceived as weak, unable to stand up for themselves, or overly aggressive if they retaliated. That is sad and allows some women to get away with behavior that we would strongly condemn if a man did it. In other news, for those who know rockstar voiceovers, here is a lighthearted lesson learned about putting your hands on someone else. Also, regarding parents disciplining their children with hitting, I can tell you as someone with black parents, I feel many use this as an excuse to abuse their children and exert excessive force or violence. Some of them really love hitting. Okay, let me stop talking. Story 6. I understand many people support the view that you should never hit anyone, but the situation is more nuanced. The idea that you should never hit a woman is not entirely accurate because it suggests you should never hit a woman under any circumstance, which is impractical. If a trained fighter or an armed woman attacks me, I will defend myself. Of course, I would prefer to run rather than engage, but if I am cornered, I will fight. Story 7. I would avoid it because the law will likely favor her regardless of what happened. That being said, I believe it is wrong to put hands on anyone, but if someone starts on you, you have the right to defend yourself. Any injuries the other person receives result from their choice to attack. I will teach my children not to put their hands on anyone unless they are defending themselves or someone else, at which point gender does not matter. Story 8. I would never instigate violence, but I believe strongly in my right to defend myself from any and all violence. I believe in equal treatment, so I do not care about your gender. Story 9. Nobody should hit anyone first. But it is acceptable to defend yourself if a grown adult hits you. They understand their actions and the consequences. I usually do not hit women because I am a big guy, and so far I have never needed to hit back to prevent it from happening again. Being seriously upset and raising my voice was always enough. I never hit a child without reason. Besides the physical harm, you never know how it affects the child's mind. Ultimately, I want a child to feel safe coming to me when they make a mistake. Some mistakes are too big for them to handle alone, and in such moments, an adult needs to intervene. If a child is afraid of the reaction, they will hide the mistake, and things will only get worse. Many children end up in prison because they tried to hide problems from adults in their lives. There are far too many cases like this. Story 10. Do not hit any people or animals unless it is done in self-defense or to prevent them from hurting another person. Story 11. You should not use violence against anyone except in the minimal necessary form to stop them from doing so. Story 12. If it is in self-defense, I do not care who you are. If a woman lays hands on me, I will lay hands on her. Keep your hands to yourself and there will not be an issue. However, I also will not go overboard. I will only use the amount of force necessary to stop it. Being a woman does not give you an excuse to hurt people and get away with it. I do not care if they are weaker. If they start it, I am going to end it. Story 13. My rule is words should be replied to with words. Do not insult others unless they insult you first. If a fight starts, do not be the one to throw the first punch. Gender does not have anything to do with defeating someone. Story 14. I do not hit people unless attacked. It would not bother me if it were related to sex. These days, many people have changed their appearance so much that it is hard to tell. Story 15. Bill Burr has a funny bit on that, basically saying that while there are plenty of reasons, you never do it. So I guess unless Ronda Rousey comes at me swinging, I wouldn't. But I would also never hit a man unless I had to defend myself. Story 16. I don't think anyone should hit anyone. However, I firmly believe if you hit someone, expect to get hit back. I am not saying hitting women is right, obviously, and I am not justifying it. But if you put your hands on someone aggressive, they are going to fight back. It is what it is. Story 17. You should not hit anyone unless it is in self-defense and there is no option to walk away or use words to calm the situation. This applies to both women and men. Men who abuse their wives are despicable. Story 18. You really should not be hitting anyone. But when you are attacked, there is no man or woman. There is an attacker. The problem with using force to de-escalate as a black belt is that you have a split second to gauge the appropriate amount of escalation needed to take control without becoming the aggressor. Almost nobody can gauge this well. You either do not escalate enough and get hurt worse, or you escalate too much and suddenly you are the one in handcuffs. Physical escalation should only be the answer when you are in fear of immediate, serious physical harm with no option to disengage. Hitting someone, even in self-defense, is almost always still a huge mess and often an expensive lifelong battle with possible criminal charges you have to hire a lawyer to defend against. It is really a bad idea to do so as anything other than the absolute last option because of the severe consequences you must deal with. Story 19. Assuming this is not rage bait, your premise is wrong. Society does not justify violence towards children and has not since I, a 56-year-old male, was a child. You should never hit anyone unless it is necessary for physical defense of yourself or someone else. Story 20. By the same logic, if a weaker man hits a stronger man, should the stronger man not fight back? What about equality? Moreover, what right was there for the first person to hit the second anyway? A woman hit a man in the first place? And if you are not particularly strong, why would you risk retaliation from someone much bigger or stronger than you? The golden rule should be keep your hands to yourself. But if you cannot, then know that the second golden rule is that actions have consequences. Story 21. Society does not justify violence towards children. Anyone who claims otherwise is mistakenly justifying their actions with a lie. Story 22. I think anyone using absolutes like that is wrong. In the most extreme example, if someone is brandishing a knife and trying to stab you, I would say you should defend yourself forcefully as many times as necessary until the threat is neutralized. You should do your best to avoid violence whenever it is safe and possible to do so. But if words, physical barriers, and escape are not options when someone is assaulting me, I will defend myself with effective and expedient means, without concern for moral judgment from others. Story 23. I do not think that is really all that incongruous. There are many ways in which we interact with children that would be unacceptable with adults. Story 24. Fight or flight kicks in when a threat arises. If you can get out of there, then do that. If you cannot escape, then fighting back is a suitable alternative, even if the threat is a woman. Story 25. The only exception to the rule I have is if a loved one is in imminent danger. Besides, you cannot hit your children either. The United States is the unusual outlier in this regard. I will defend myself, but only without intent to harm if a woman were hitting me. As I said, force comes into play only if someone else is under attack. Story 26. I would only hit another person in self-defense. This applies equally whether it is a woman or a man who is trying to attack me. Story 27. Because the context never matters to the authorities or anyone, and you will be in deep trouble. As a wise man once said, just walk away. Story 28. Generally, you should not hit anyone. When it comes to women, this rule is especially important because women are generally physically weaker than men, and regardless of the context, the law will hold you accountable even if it was self-defense. Story 29. Never is dumb, but you should refrain from doing it until absolutely necessary to protect yourself or others. Also, as a man, you very often can restrain a woman without hitting her, and that should be attempted first. Story 30. You should not hit anyone. You should defend yourself when necessary, and if it is necessary, the gender of your attacker is not relevant. You certainly should not be hitting children. Story 31. I grew up with that drilled into me. My dad was born in 1942 or 1943. I have never personally been in a situation where I had to hit a woman. Obviously, there are times when it might be necessary to hit a woman. However, these days I tend to see people enjoying themselves by hitting a woman in the jaw for slapping or pushing them. There are entire online communities built around watching videos of women getting knocked out for relatively minor acts like pushing or slapping. The comments are interesting. Sometimes it seems like a group of men really want to beat up on women and just need a reason. Equal rights, equal fights, and all that. But they do not act that tough when another man slaps them. Story 32. In a self-defense situation, I will absolutely hit anyone, including women, the elderly, and children. The same applies to defending my family. This has not come up so far. In any other situation, I will not hit anyone. Story 33. In regard to violence against children, I do not think a spanking is malicious violence. It is a way to instill negative reinforcement. Frankly, considering the people I see in police body camera videos, we need more spankings for children because they are not growing up right. About the title, no, you should never attack a woman. You really should not attack anyone. Fortunately, women, due to biology, and this is why they should not be in the armed forces, are easy enough to restrain if they are being malicious. But yes, if you slap me and think you will get away with it, these hands are rated everyone. Story 34. If I am attacked by any gender, I will use restraint as much as is reasonable to protect myself. Usually, I will try to walk away, dodge, or put myself behind something physical like a table or door. If all that fails, I will block and push first. I will only apply force if I can see the attacker is trained or agile enough to land a blow that could cause serious harm, or if they are putting others at risk. I have had to push and then hold a woman in an arm lock on the ground before because she was trying to beat up a teenage child who could not defend themselves. Luckily, someone recorded the incident, so the police took over when they arrived and thanked me for de-escalating with as little violence as possible. Story 35. As a woman, I understand that I am physically weaker. In one-on-one combat, almost any man could overpower me, but I am also on the smaller side for women. I have been assaulted by men in the past. The damage they can do to me compared to the damage I can do to them is significant. I am not saying it is okay for women to hit men. That is never acceptable. What I am saying is that men should recognize that, in general, they could easily overpower a woman. The best course of action when situations become violent or near violence is to walk away to protect both parties physically and legally. As a mother, if anyone tried to beat my children to discipline them, I probably could not stop myself from defending them fiercely despite my size. Story 36. My threshold for hitting a woman is significantly higher than it is for a man. It is not never, but I would have to be in legitimate fear of serious, permanent harm with no means of escape. Story 37. Only apply enough force to defuse the situation. Unless she is stronger than you, it will not be equal force. If you have to resort to physical pain to teach children right from wrong, you have already failed at discipline. Story 38. I am non-violent except in terms of self-defense and only if there is no other option. Even if I am hit by a woman, I will not necessarily go all out against her since the law tends to be biased against men in these types of altercations. The first thing I will try to do is make my way to a safe location and report to the authorities. Story 39. The circumstances in which you hit a woman should be just. If that is how you protect yourself and the people around you, go for it. But if it is out of spite and not self-defense, you will face consequences in both the court of law and the court of public opinion, rightfully so. Story 40. I think the word never is a bit of exaggeration for dramatic effect. When people say never hit a woman, they are not picturing a real self-defense situation. They do not think you should let a knife-wielding woman stab you to death. The intended meaning is closer to, I am against assaulting women. Story 41. If I had not hit a woman as a child, I would be dead. As an adult, I have never felt threatened like that, so I never have, even when receiving something abusive from a woman. If you feel threatened with imminent harm, then it is not an issue. I have also been punched in the face while playing pool by a guy shooting on the table next to us. He looked like a little twig. I am in very good shape and a trained fighter. I told him he could apologize or I would reciprocate, and we would see if he could stand after I punched him in the face. He apologized and bought us a pitcher. I avoid fighting weak people. Gender is irrelevant. I did spar against a woman in mixed martial arts. She was much better than I, and if I acted hesitant because she was a woman, she would knock me out. Story 42. Violence does not solve anything, especially not with children. Talk to them and explain why certain things are wrong and what the consequences are. If a woman hits me, I will only hit back if she assaults me first. A slap would not be a reason for me to hit back. Story 43. Never start a fight, but defend yourself if you are in one. Neutralize the threat level and remove yourself from the situation. Story 44. Violence towards children. I do not believe that corporal punishment against children is necessarily bad if it is light and there is a clear connection between the punishment and the corrective intent. I live in a state in the United States of America that permits corporal punishment. I would never advocate harmful or excessive punishment. For women, men have a duty to refrain from abusing their inherent strength advantage. My wife once slapped my chest out of anger, and I did not reciprocate. On a lighter note, before I was set to deploy overseas in the military reserves, I got up around 4:30 a.m. to leave and woke my wife to hug her goodbye. She was crying and clenching her teeth on what she thought was my shirt. It was my arm and it drew blood. I did not realize it, but an automatic response to the stimulus caused my leg to knee her in the gut. I felt very bad because I had no control. We joke about it now and say it was because I subconsciously kneed her. Story 45. It is not gendered for me. I am a judo black belt. Unless someone poses a real threat, whether male or female, I am not going to send them into the concrete at terminal velocity. The police would consider that excessive violence given my background. If a male or female comes at me with a knife, for example, I go into kill or be killed mode. Story 46. Discipline is discipline until it becomes abuse. The difference usually lies in the force, method, and overall behavior of the parent administering it. I was spanked as a child for misbehavior. It teaches accountability and that parents are stronger than their children. Regarding the idea of never hitting a woman, I have always assumed this focused narrowly on abuse, such as people who beat their wives or girlfriends. I have never equated it mentally to situations where an adult woman decides to strike an adult man. If you choose to hit someone, you should expect consequences. I believe the concept of proportional force applies. If a woman slapped me, I would not respond with a full power punch. She does not pose the same physical threat as a man who slapped me, so my response should not be as violent. You can liken it to being slapped by a very skinny or elderly man. You would not respond with excessive force. That said, some larger women could warrant a stronger response if they pose a greater threat. Story 47. Men are biologically stronger than women, with longer arms and more muscle mass. However, people should never hit anyone because the person struck might fall, hit their head on the curb, and potentially die, which could be considered murder. Story 48. You should never hit a woman. I can't believe we are still having this conversation. It seems like every bad person out there is trying to find any reason to justify it. You should also never hit your children. Story 49. Do you think it is really strange that society justifies violence towards children as parenting or discipline? No, I think it is a very harsh way to teach a lesson. Parenting is about teaching a child lessons so they can eventually fend for themselves in reality. It is part of reality that certain levels of rule breaking will result in people or society responding with consequences. At some point, a child must understand that they are not invincible or untouchable. Some people use this teaching method far too often and freely. Some just physically punish children, teaching them a completely false lesson. You are always teaching children a lesson about something with everything you do or do not do. Physical punishment is a tool in the toolkit but should be used very rarely and only in exceptional cases, ideally never. As for women, if a woman decides to pick a physical fight with a man, she does so fully aware of the physical differences, fully aware that the man cannot know whether she is armed, how well she is trained, or how far she is willing to go. Abuse is not just measured by physical force but also by the psychological impact on the victim when violence is used against them. There is a very distorted view of what constitutes violence. Pinning down someone dangerous is absolutely justified if that person disregards another's right to free movement in public spaces, right to physical integrity, right to property, or right to privacy. However, restraining a woman is often framed as violence far more often than when the same thing is done to a man. Shoving someone out of the way who is intentionally blocking your path and impairing your freedom of movement is justified. People are not entitled to your time, your attention, or for you to remain where you want them unless they have your official consent or are part of an authorized group such as the police or security staff responsible for a privately owned space. Story 50. It is because of the political correctness trend. Political correctness is the most significant obstruction in the way of enlightenment. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.